and then I studied for math.
Wow.
And then I would sleep by
You
11.
were very productive.
It was.
Well,
Good
I
job.
thought I was kind of productive last night. I went home, and then I decided, I was like, well, I think I want to like sit in bed because I'm freezing. So I sat in bed and I studied my vocab, and I did homework, and then I took a nap before I went to work. And then I came home to a delicious dinner.
That's nice.
Pretty nice. Last time.
Yeah, we do have,
So I'm still wearing my vocab because I forgot to wear today.
yeah,
Do you think Lauren left her pencil case here?
I doubt it.
Why? I want one of those sticky tabs.
Oh,
Do you have any sticky tabs?
you're on camera.
I don't care.
No, I don't have
Big
any.
one then.
I don't have any.
No one.
The only thing a little bit nervous for is writing my
Writing your own.
like,
oh,
like,
yeah.
like fully write.
Hopefully my understood really well mentally, like all I got.
It's just like everyone is different. Like there's no fun. I know, but these make me nervous because like,
I feel a little more comfortable with these than the other ones.
but
Wait, if we're doing the quiz, or for history, the test is like only 2 chapters, is that our final or just a regular? I think that was our final.
yeah, the 3, 4, 5, 7, 6, 7, 8, I can't remember. 7, 8, 9.
Yeah.
Yeah, that one. I was close.
So this is Matt today and Lauren.
Yeah.
Nope, I'm gonna turn to a page.
So it's this one.
Oh, all right.
It's a little confusing.
It's all right, I like your conservation
Yeah.
paper here. Yeah.
My pencil and everything in my
Oh, you can
backpack.
go get it, go ahead.
Thank you.
It's right here on that. We'll read over here on the left.
The notes I have up here are similarly related to number 4. So if you're confused about what number 4 is wanting for you to talk about, the question says, how did Theodore Roosevelt expand the role of the federal government? Refer to specific passages in the chapter in your response. I don't know that you necessarily need to quote specific passages, but basically the section is broken up into the sections, and each of the titles are really an action that Roosevelt took to help expand the federal government. So let me go through a few notes and then we'll make an exact list of the things that he did. So Roosevelt was said to have been the one that started what we know as the modern presidency, meaning that for the first time we had a president who really wanted to help those who couldn't help themselves, or who were being bullied by big businesses and corporations. So they did a lot, the government did a lot of intervening in things, which is not always a good thing, obviously, but in these cases it was good during this time period. We needed it. So when we talk about federal power, this just means the national government's power, right? The central government. And the president is, of course, part of the central government. So one of the things that he does is he intervenes in a strike, and typically the government had not ever really intervened in strikes before. Strikes were something that were between the workers and the operators of the company or of the business. But things were getting so bad here, and the workers were being treated so poorly, that the federal government steps in. They intervene and they help to settle the dispute peacefully and legally. And so this is what's called federal arbitration. We had seen this in a previous chapter, and arbitration is just where you have a third party that's impartial, meaning they don't have any special connections with either group. And they step in to help settle. It's like a lot of high schools have peer mediators, kids that'll step in and try to like settle a fight between two other kids. And the peer mediator always has to be somebody that's not friends with either one of the kids, because obviously if they're friends with somebody on the one side, then they're probably going to favor that person's opinion, and it's not going to be a fair settlement. So it always has to be somebody who doesn't have any vested interest in either of the opposing teams, if you will. So federal arbitration, then, they began to use this method of settling disputes in other areas of society, not just during strikes. So that set the precedent there. They also began to break up corrupt trusts. And what is a trust? It came up in one of the previous chapters, when we were talking about all of the big corporation guys like Andrew Carnegie and J.D. Rockefeller. Anybody remember, Olivia?
I kind of think of it kind of like stock, but it's like money set aside through the big companies.
Yes.
So if they take advantage of you.
Yeah, so since they have complete control over this money that's been set aside, these big top dogs working together, then they also can do what they want with it, and the government doesn't have a say. So, yeah, so trusts are not always a bad thing, but they were during this time. They became very corrupt, and so they tried to go in and regulate these trusts, even break them up sometimes if they were very corrupt. Something else that Roosevelt did was to go in and regulate the railroad system. The railroads were also large businesses back then, and they had monopolies over farmers, over other companies that were using their services. And so, and people couldn't really do anything about it. They had no control over it. So the government decided, okay, these people are being taken advantage of by these big railroad companies. They're getting a little out of hand. So we're going to regulate, meaning just we're going to install some general rules that everyone has to follow across the country so that everybody knows what's going on with this business and nobody can step above the law, basically. Sometimes too much federal regulation is bad. Why? Why do we not want the government making rules for everything? Olivia?
Then the people don't really have as much say in how they want to.
Yeah, then it doesn't become, it's no longer a democracy, really. Or, obviously in a capitalist society, which we've talked about before, the whole reason why it works is because people pretty much, for the most part, have free reign in competition and in business, and not a lot of other countries have that. It's just that sometimes there's a very brutal, inhuman side to it, because we're all trying to compete against each other, and then we forget to help each other sometimes as well. So it's good to have a nice balance there. Okay, so that was another thing they did. Then Roosevelt also did a lot within the food industry, and I don't know if you guys all read the first little passage with the excerpt from The Jungle. The Jungle talks about the meatpacking industry in Chicago during the late 1800s, early 1900s, and it was just gross. And first of all, it was a really difficult job for the workers in the factories. And you can imagine if you're dealing with slaughtered animals all day, it would be a very rough life. But also, after some inspection, they realized that there were a lot of parts and things going into the meat that shouldn't have been there. And so, I'll spare you some of the details, but they even talk about this in the book, but it was just really gross, and nothing was being inspected, nothing was being regulated. So the government came up with these acts, basically, the Meat Inspection Act, and it just set, a series of rules. Meatpacking industries must make sure that, the area is clean. They must make sure that no other animal products get into the beef, and they must make sure, blah, 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 that their workers are clean and that kind of thing. The Pure Food and Drug Act, what did this do? Does anybody remember? I'm not sure if it was one of the attorneys or not, but the Pure Food and Drug Act, this made it so that companies had to state what ingredients they were putting into their food, especially if they were doing like prepackaged foods. And obviously now, when you go to the grocery store and you buy something, if it's in a package, you have a list of ingredients, you have the breakdown of all of the nutrients and calories and all of that, and companies legally have to do that. It's a government regulated law, so that we know what we're buying, we're aware of what we're taking into our bodies, that kind of thing. And that's for us, for our safety, but it's also for the safety of the company, because companies were getting sued and all kinds of things for not telling people what they were putting in their products, and then people would get sick and all kinds of things would happen. So it was not regulated until this point in history. Roosevelt also did a lot to conserve our natural resources, and during the period of industrialization, natural resources and the wilderness was really put on the back burner. People weren't very concerned with it, and so we were beginning to run out of trees and things like that. So that's an overstatement, obviously, but so they set aside some tracts of land for national parks and wildlife refuges and things like that. So this was another way that the federal government controlled the country, by putting aside specific land that no one else was allowed to use or purchase. And then civil rights during this time period, there wasn't a whole lot going on. Roosevelt helped a few individual African Americans, but he didn't actually put anything into effect for the general good of African Americans, because people were still pretty prejudiced during this time. And it wasn't his top priority to work on this. He had other things going on, so unfortunately, but W.E.B. Du Bois, who was a really influential African American man during this time, he helps put together what's called the Niagara Movement, and the Niagara Movement was a group of African Americans that were vying for civil rights, for equality, and they later became the NAACP, and we still have the NAACP today. They work for the advancement of, well, the C stands for colored people. Obviously, we don't really use this term anymore. It's politically incorrect, but for African Americans. So they do a lot to help promote equal rights for everyone, no matter what race you are. So if we had to make a little list of individual things that Roosevelt did, I'll just write a few over here. So the book says, what does he use the federal power for? Just meaning he uses his position as president to make these things happen, right? So we have changes in food and drugs, positive changes with these acts. He makes things cleaner, safer. He does a lot with conservation. Let's see here. Okay, arbitration, which is the intervening, the peer mediating on a big scale. Let's see here. Oh, and then regulation of big business. And so trusts were part of big business, as were railroads. So those are the major things that he did. Okay. Does anybody have any questions? Does that all make sense? All of the terms? There's something else I was going to share, but I forgot now. Okay, so for tomorrow, the next section in the book is actually it's a little cultural excerpt on American literature and the muckrakers. And what did we say yesterday? What did the muckrakers do? Who were they? Marnay?
We were journalists that kind of like talked about all like the corrupt stuff that was happening in politics.
Yeah, yeah. So they were like, you know, satirists who kind of like to poke fun at the corruptness going on in America, both within society and within politics as well. And so, for example, Upton Sinclair, the author of this book, The Jungle, he's creating this expose on the horribleness of the meatpacking industry, and you know, here America, look at what's going on. So obviously he was criticized by the meatpacking industry for writing this book, but everyone else seemed to appreciate the truthfulness that he was putting out there. Now, was the book exaggerated? Probably. But the point is that he put this information out that most people were unaware of. So this led to the national investigation of how safe our food really was. And obviously it's a huge concern still even today. We're always coming up with new like food and drug acts and all kinds of things. So they have an excerpt from his book, The Jungle, in here. And if anybody is interested in actually reading it, Maddie, you said Mrs. Bream has a copy. Has anybody read it before? Okay. I read it, but it wasn't part of my high school curriculum. I think I read it in college on my own. But it's a bit rough to get through, but it's interesting and thought-provoking for sure. So for tomorrow, they have 3 different excerpts here, and then I just want for you to answer the first